historic Quebec City leaps into the headlines. The ancient capital on the St. Lawrence is once more the scene of a conference of Allied powers. From the four corners of the globe come journalists, photographers, and radio commentators, representatives of all the news-gathering agencies, to keep the world informed of the events of the conference. Second conference in 12 months to take place in Quebec. Military leaders of Great Britain and the United States arrive at Ancien Lorette Airport. Among the first to arrive are Field Marshal Sir John Dill, Chief of the British Military Mission in Washington, Admiral Sir Percy Nobel, Head of the British Admiralty Delegation in Washington, and Air Marshal Sir William Welsh. Another plane brings General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. The new arrivals are greeted by Air Marshal Leckie, Canada's Chief of Air Staff, and Lieutenant General Murchie of the Canadian Army. Conferences of the U.S.-British Combined Chiefs of Staff begin at the Chateau Frontenac. W.L. Mackenzie King, Canadian Prime Minister, arrives at Quebec's Palais Station. Official host to the conference, Mr. King will be spokesman for Canada. At Wolfe's Cove, the Allied leaders arrive within a few moments of each other. The Earl of Athlone, Governor-General of Canada, and Princess Alice are at the station for the official greeting. It was at Wolfe's Cove in 1759 that General Wolfe landed his army for the battle on the Plains of Abraham that decided the fate of Canada. Here in 1944 are met the two leaders of great nations to decide the fate of Germany and Japan. Towering above the river is the great citadel of Quebec. In this ancient fortress, talks between the two chiefs and their military staffs take place. The chain gates of the fort swing open to admit the procession. The conference of 1943 saw the planning of invasion, the planning of the drive from the Normandy beach to the borders of the Nazi Reich. The Guard of Honor, composed of units of the three Canadian services commanded by Brigadier Edmond Blais, presents arms as Canada's distinguished visitors enter the inner courtyard. Conferences are held within the closely guarded citadel, and the stage is set to plan the conclusion of the war in Europe and prepare the last stages of the war in the Pacific. In the press room, newspapermen meet with Stephen Early, Secretary to President Roosevelt, A.D. Dunton, Head of Canada's Wartime Information Board, and R.J. Cruikshank of the British Ministry of Information. Press representatives work day and night. By wire, cable, and radio, news of day-to-day progress is rushed to the world. official host to the conference, the Canadian Prime Minister receives the military leaders at a state dinner. Mrs. Roosevelt, Mrs. Churchill, Sir Eugene Fizet, Lieutenant Governor of Quebec, and Lady Fizet greet the guests. The state dinner given by the Canadian government is the only official function during the conference. For one evening, military leaders and officials gather in the great ballroom of the hotel. Members of the combined chiefs of staff leave the Chateau Frontenac to meet the President and the Prime Minister at the Citadel. Decisions will be spelled in action in Asia, the South Pacific, Italy, the Balkans, and in Europe. With Mr. Roosevelt and Mr. Churchill, the Allied chiefs of staff pose for the news cameraman. The conference reaches the late stages and the Allied leaders hold a press conference. Mr. Roosevelt says that after the surrender of Germany, we shall continue fighting side by side until Japan surrenders. Mr. Churchill speaks of the decisions of the conference which time will reveal, just as the decisions of the last Quebec Conference were realized in Europe. So in the words of Mr. Churchill, let it be with this conference. Let it carry the seeds of victory in the shortest possible time.